Peppa Pig. Something is wrong with Peppa. One rainy morning, Peppa woke up earlier than usual. Her room seemed normal, but something felt off. She looked in the mirror and noticed her reflection appeared strange, slightly distorted. Maybe it's just my imagination, she thought, and went down for breakfast. Throughout the day, Peppa noticed her friends acting differently. Susie, usually cheerful, kept her distance and barely spoke to her. During playtime, Susie finally said, "You look strange today." Peppa frowned but didn't reply. Later, while playing in the yard, she caught her reflection in a puddle. Her eyes seemed darker, and her smile was unnervingly wide, almost creepy. She blinked and the reflection looked normal again. By evening, her family started noticing changes in her behavior. Peppa was unusually quiet, no longer laughing, and her occasional smiles seemed unsettling. "Are you feeling okay, dear?" Mummy Pig asked at dinner. "Yes, Mummy," Peppa replied, but her voice sounded lower and stranger than usual. Late that night, George woke up to strange whispers coming from Peppa's room. He tiptoed to her door and peeked inside. She was standing in front of her mirror, whispering something, but her reflection wasn't moving in sync. It seemed alive, moving on its own. "Peppa?" George asked, his voice trembling. She slowly turned toward him, and for a brief moment, her eyes glowed red. "Go back to bed, George," she said in a voice that wasn't hers. The next day, things got even worse. Peppa became aggressive, breaking George's toys and ripping books. She seemed to enjoy it, laughing in a hoarse, chilling tone that made Mummy and Daddy Pig exchange worried glances. Later that night, loud noises came from Peppa's room. Her parents rushed upstairs to find her standing by the window. She didn't move, but her shadow on the wall writhed and twisted as if it had a life of its own. "Peppa, what are you doing?" Mummy Pig asked, her voice shaking. "I'm not Peppa," she said, turning slowly. Her eyes were completely black, and her smile was unnaturally wide. The next morning, the house was empty. No one knew what had happened to Mummy, Daddy, or George. The camera slowly panned to the kitchen, where Peppa sat alone at the table. She smiled, her eyes still dark and empty. Peppa Pig. The Vanishing Shadows. The day started like any other. Peppa's family was having breakfast when Daddy Pig let out a loud sneeze. "Bless you, Daddy," Peppa said, giggling. "I think I've caught a little cold," Daddy Pig muttered, wiping his nose. But by evening, his condition had worsened. He looked tired, and his skin seemed paler than usual. "You need to rest, dear," Mummy Pig said, tucking him into the couch. The next day, when Peppa woke up, Mummy Pig was gone. Peppa found her phone on the kitchen table and noticed that everything was still in its place. But Mummy was nowhere to be found. "Where's Mummy?" Peppa asked. "She probably stepped out," Daddy Pig replied hoarsely, but his voice sounded strange, as though it came from far away. Strange things began to happen. George disappeared too, leaving only his favorite toy dinosaur behind. Peppa's friends stopped visiting, and even Susie Sheep wasn't answering her calls. Peppa started to notice the house growing darker, even during the day. The walls seemed to shift, and she could hear whispers calling her name. "Daddy, what's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. But Daddy Pig didn't answer. He just sat in his chair, staring at nothing. That evening, when Peppa approached him again, she noticed that his shadow was moving separately from his body. "Daddy, are you okay?" she asked. His head turned slowly toward her, and his eyes were completely black. "They took everyone, but they left you. For me," he said, smiling with a strange, eerie grin. Peppa stumbled backward, her heart pounding. She tried to run out of the house, but when she opened the door, there was only darkness. Stepping into it, she felt invisible hands pulling her back inside. "Don't be afraid, Peppa. We'll stay together. Forever," Daddy Pig's voice echoed. The episode ended grimly. The camera slowly panned out, showing the house swallowed by an endless, suffocating darkness. Inside, only Daddy Pig and Peppa remained, surrounded by shifting shadows. Strange happenings in the house. Peppa wakes up in the middle of the night to a strange noise, like faint whimpering. She gets out of bed and notices that her toy dinosaur is missing. George is awake too and says he had a strange dream about someone standing in the corner of his room, watching him. Peppa goes to her parents' room but finds it empty. The windows in the house are shut tight, and outside there's nothing but thick gray fog. Where is everyone? Why is it so quiet? George asks. The TV suddenly turns on by itself, and a deep, inhuman voice says, "You've been happy for too long. It's time to pay for it." The house begins to change. Dust covers the floors, cracks appear on the walls, and the mirror in the bathroom becomes cloudy. When Peppa looks into it, she doesn't see her reflection, but something that looks like her, with empty eyes and a sinister smile. George starts to panic and suddenly vanishes into the dark hallway. Peppa hears him scream but can't find him. Instead, she discovers his toy dinosaur, now covered in dirt.